Hey kids, cook real food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector, and I am honored to be hosting Jess Donovan today. She's a naturopath and a mom of two from Australia, and we're going to kind of dig into kids' health and the way all our bodies are connected. Thanks for being here, Jess.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be talking to you.
Yeah, it's always so fun to record from like the US to Australia because it's evening for me. I just tucked my kids in. It's like mid-morning for Jess, and I don't know why. That just always cracks me up. So y'all can laugh with me. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Jess before we jump in. She founded the Natural Super Kids Club and is Australia's resource for transforming children's health in ways that are easy for parents to understand and implement. I love that. I love kind of the baby steps, like super digestible approach. And Jess believes children are not simply smaller versions of adults. They have unique biochemical needs, require proper nutrition, and healthy lifestyles to support that rapid growth and ensure that they lay down essential foundations for a long and healthy life. We are all on board with that for sure. And then, so she's got a fun side too. She's all about backpacking, travel, and being out in nature, and super against mama guilt. So she's going to celebrate each step with us as we help our children thrive. So let's start with the fun stuff, Jess. Tell us one of the wildest moments on your 13-month RV trip with your family.
Oh, so many, so many.
Really? Oh no.
Well, my favorite part was our 3 weeks in the remote Kimberley up in the northern part of Western Australia. It was, hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of corrugated roads, but just beautiful scenery. Yeah, bump. Very, very remote. Really, no, nothing out there except beauty. Boab trees, crocodiles,
Okay.
swimming holes, hiking. It was just amazing. I would definitely put it on your bucket list. It's not a place where a lot of people go in Australia because it is quite remote, but
Okay.
that's just me in a nutshell. I love that sort of thing.
Yes, I can tell you have the spirit of adventure, and that's super cool. So now what about the practical? What are your like healthy food lifelines when you were on that 13-month trip? And this was your whole family, by the way, just so that the audience understands. This is mom, dad, two kids
Yes.
smashed together in a camper.
Yes, exactly. So, lots of challenges in there, but such an amazing experience. It was quite challenging, actually. I mean, obviously as a naturopath, food and nutrition is a real priority for me. And it did get tough, particularly in the remote places where there was limited access to fresh food. But I just really kept it simple. When we were remote, I just made sure that I stocked up on those more hardy fruits and veggies, the apples. I remember we bought a whole watermelon for this trip out into the Kimberley and kind of kept it for the last week because that was the only sort of fresh fruit that we had. So that was quite challenging. But generally when we were in more, the built up places, I just kept it simple, lots of fruits and veg, making wraps for lunch. I did have a go-to sort of spelt sultana slice recipe that I used to make in our barbecue because I didn't have an oven.
Oh, funny.
Yeah, so we just really went back to basics. Lots of, kids were hungry, grab a carrot or a piece of celery or, something like that.
That's so interesting. I have a friend who will tell her kids, like, if you want a snack, grab a carrot. And if they're actually hungry, they'll get a carrot. And if they're just like bored and looking around, they don't actually need a snack. So that's interesting. Did your kids like shift any habits, whether eating or just like behavior or games, interaction, stuff like that? Like, what did you notice?
Yeah, we had an interesting experience on this sort of more remote area where we had to just grab a box of cereal, a box of kind of quite sugary cereal because there was really nothing else for breakfast. And so I found it interesting kind of trying to transition them back to our regular, oats and nuts and seeds without the sugar for breakfast. So that was really apparent to me how quickly they can that their tastes can change. And I had to really to do that really slowly. So I'd do sort of, half cereal, half our sort of oaty nut mix and gradually got them back onto the healthier options. So my kids are they don't have any particular health issues or chronic health issues. So their systems are quite robust. So they don't tend to be really affected hugely if it's sort of short amounts of time. And of course, I'm always sort of thinking about different ways to get, good nutrition into them as well.
Gotcha. Oh, that's so interesting. So now when we think about our kids, not in RVs, but going to school, there's two big health worries for a lot of parents, right? That too much sugar that you just touched on and all those germs. So do you have any favorite immunity boosting foods for busy families?
Oh, definitely. So I think you've kind of touched on it there. I think really it's important to look at those things within a child's diet and lifestyle that can be depleting their immunity first. Otherwise, if we're just focusing on boosting their immune system, it's almost like putting, pouring water into a bucket that's got holes in it and it's sort of just all draining out. So a few of the things that you want to be conscious of in terms of things that deplete immunity. The big one is sugar. Sugar actually reduces the activity of our neutrophils, and our neutrophils are that first line defense against those germs that come in. So if they're weaker and more sluggish, which is what sugar does to them, kids are not going to be able to sort of fight off those bugs in behind the scenes as much, and they're going to get sick sort of more often. So avoiding sugar is a big one. But when it comes to boosting immunity, I think that probably the most important things are to focus on those high antioxidant foods. So lots of colour on the plate, lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. I mean, we're in different seasons here as well. So we're heading into winter right now. And so I always make sure there's some raw veg in my kids' lunchbox. I'm lucky that they eat it. Because cooking food actually depletes the antioxidant levels. So making sure, and we tend to go for those warmer sort of food, soups and casseroles and stews in the winter, but always making sure that we're accompanying those sorts of foods with some raw food on the plate, some sliced capsicum. You guys call it peppers, I think, over there, like red peppers. We call them capsicums. They're a really great source of vitamin C and antioxidants, but generally just trying to get lots of colour on the plate for our kids is great for their immunity. And the other one I would say would be fermented foods. So the sauerkraut, the kombucha, the kefir, and you don't need a lot of this stuff. It can be a bit of a challenge to get these kinds of things into our kids. They're a bit of an acquired taste, but just start with a little sliver of sauerkraut. On something else that they're eating. They may not even notice, but sort of gradually developing that taste. And just because they don't like sauerkraut doesn't mean you can't experiment with other fermented foods. I don't know, what's available to you guys over there, but one of the things that my kids really love is cashew cheese, fermented cashew cheese that Yeah, you can make it fairly easily. I buy it at my local farmer's market, and coconut kefir. So it's kind of a little bit of a sparkling coconut water. They're two that my kids really like. Not sure how accessible they are over in the States.
Yeah, I make water kefir. So it's probably like similar as far as a bubbly drink, but
very similar. Just made with coconut water instead of water, which it's great too. It's just good to play around with the different fermented foods because they can have a great, positive impact on our kids' immunity.
And if because first of all, true fermented foods can be hard to find. I think no matter where in the world you are, I could be wrong, but we buy a jar of sauerkraut not in the fridge, like on the shelf. So it's been canned. They still call it sauerkraut, but it's dead.
Yeah.
So PS to all the Americans, that's not what we're talking about here. That's just like wilty cabbage. We're talking about living probiotic fermented foods that you have to refrigerate. So they are sometimes difficult to find, getting easier. But they might be expensive. Maybe the kids don't have the taste. Is a supplement okay too? Is that a good bridge at least as we're trying to build up the taste?
Definitely. And I like to use a combination of, probiotic supplements and fermented foods. And that's a really great point, especially while you're trying to bridge up the taste, as you say. And sauerkraut and those fermented veg, they're really easy to make yourself. They're just a little bit time consuming. So It depends what's accessible in your area. We're really lucky to have a really great farmers market every Saturday morning near us. So you're looking for, you don't want to buy sauerkraut, like you said, from the supermarkets. You know, you want to be looking in the Whole Foods stores, which I know you guys have some great Whole Foods stores over in the States, or farmers markets, you know, those sort of smaller producers that are producing those living fermented veggies. And if you don't have access to that, then I guess the option is that you just need to make your own.
Right, that's true. That's not too hard. So I'm just making a note to myself. We will include links to some sauerkraut recipes, kimchi recipe, and places where you can order sauerkraut online if it's in the budget. But I'll warn you, it can be a little bit of a shocker. But you are talking, like, you're talking a small serving. Like, this isn't something you eat by the cup.
No, exactly. And I think, you know, I mean, I don't know what the prices are like over there, but we pay about $15 for a decent sized jar. Our dollar's a bit weaker than yours. But that jar would last us, say, about 4 weeks, and, you know, maybe even a bit longer. So it's not something that you need to, you know, budget for every week. And so if you break it down, you know, it's more reasonable if you look at it that way.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It does. It can be pricey over here. Probably still maybe $15 for a jar.
Yeah, right.
But it is important to remember that, yeah, just a little scoop. So I was going to ask you about nutrient deficiencies anyway, and then I took your quiz for one of my kids. So Jess has a quiz. I'm like, oh, there's so much to think about. What should we focus on, you know, for a given child, and just answer some really interesting questions about that child. And the result I got was that I should focus on nutrient intake. And I was like, oh, I was going to ask her about that.
There you go.
Yeah, are there certain nutrients that are kind of commonly deficient in kids? And then what should parents do about seeking the best balance of foods or maybe supplements?
Yeah, so unfortunately, you know, those sort of more low-grade deficiencies in our kids are really, really common. And it comes down to, you know, the food that we're eating. We're eating more processed, packaged, refined food, which is lacking nutrients. But also, you know, there's the quality of the soil and all of those things that are important as well. So even if we're eating really good food, because you know, there's this sort of pattern of over farming, if the soil's depleted, then it's just not going to be getting through to the food. So I do believe, you know, most kids need some supplements to be in optimum health. Of course, we want to lay that really good foundation with the diet. There's nothing that can replace that. But even if you're giving your child like a good quality multivitamin, if they're in good health, just a couple of times a week to kind of, as a bit of an insurance policy to make sure they're getting all those nutrients. But the most common nutrient deficiencies that I see in the kids that I work with, omega-3s are definitely one of them. Iron is another one. Iodine is another one. And zinc is the other one. There are some others, but they're probably the most common. And I guess as a broader kind of look at that, the best thing that we can do to make sure our kids are getting a good range of nutrients is to make sure that we're, you know, focusing on more real whole foods and less processed packaged food. Anything that comes out of a packet is generally going to be, you know, nutrient depleted, particularly if it's refined and it's got a long ingredient list, whereas food that comes from nature, straight off a tree, straight off an animal, is going to be more nutrient dense. The other really important thing to think about is the types of grains that kids are eating. They tend to be more keen on the refined, white, beigey kind of grains. But if we can even switch that up just a little bit, you know, start adding a little bit of brown rice to the white rice, or start adding some spelt pasta to the regular pasta that they like. Slowly changing the bread that we're eating, so they're eating more, you know, perhaps rye or spelt grains rather than the modern wheat, which is very refined. So it's about sort of adding nutrition to foods that they're already liking is one of my sort of best tips, to start adding nutrition and getting them used to different tastes. Another thing I would say is animal products are quite nutrient dense if we're choosing the right animal products. So red meat and fish and seafood. You know, red meat's great for the iron and the zinc and the protein. The fish and seafood is really important for the iodine and the omega-3s. So making sure that you're incorporating those kinds of foods into the diet. Lots of families focus on chicken. I don't know, I think it's probably similar in the States. It's very versatile, and chicken's okay, but it's not as nutrient rich as a red meat or a fish or seafood. So just keeping that in mind as well.
Okay, that's really good to hear because I think, I mean, in general, and there's so many shifts. There's so many shifts in nutrition and in the culture, but like in general, there's sort of a shift right now to like plant-based whole foods and a little bit away from meat. So I can see people eschewing meat and, but maybe just incorporating a little chicken here and there. And here you're
Yeah.
saying, yeah, like if you're going to choose one meat, don't let it be chicken, but like the fish and the red meat. So that's super interesting. It's good for us to hear that, really we don't want to go too far down any one path. We want to stay kind of like in the center with traditional foods. I know einkorn is another grain that's really ancient, and we can even get einkorn pasta now, which is pretty cool. Do you recommend supplements for kids, or like only with testing, or should everybody just kind of take omega-3s no matter what?
Yeah, I think it's good to get some professional help because it can be really overwhelming. Where do I even start? Does my child need zinc? Do they need omega-3s? Do they need more iodine? So I think getting some professional help, whether it's just, it doesn't even necessarily need to be testing, but someone who can look at a child's diet and think about, have more of a professional view of what's potentially lacking, particularly fussy, picky kids that aren't, eating a good range of foods. I think a good multivitamin that covers all the bases is good. And the majority of the kids that I see in clinic will end up on some sort of an omega-3 supplement because we need to be eating 3 to 4 serves of oily fish a week to be getting adequate omega-3s. And I don't know many families that are doing that.
No, I don't either.
Yeah. So, and there's other ways you can get omega-3s in, things like chia seeds and hemp seeds and those sorts of things. But fish and seafood are by far the most valuable sources of those omega-3s. And omega-3s are so important for a child's developing brain and their nervous system and that sort of thing. And can I just go back? I just wanted to clarify with the meat thing. When I'm talking about including more red meat and seafood and fish in the diet, I'm not talking about big portions either. So a child's palm is a really good indicator. So it's only small amounts. And I think those plant-based diets are great. We definitely all need more veggies in our diet. So, 3/4 of your plate should be veggies and salad and maybe a bit of whole grains, and just that small amount of animal protein is the general sort of recommendation that I give.
Yes, good clarification. Thank you for doing that. Because that would be another tendency in America is just like meat all the time and, on a bun or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. So allergies seem to be so much more prevalent in our kids, like just in excessively prevalent compared to even when we were kids just 30 years ago. So, I have a couple questions about that. First, should parents do anything in particular to like be on the lookout with their own kids to determine if they have food sensitivities? And do you have any tips for someone who doesn't have allergies but really wants to be generous and sensitive to like other friends in school or church who do?
Yeah, so great questions. And it's crazy when you look at the stats on allergies, they are, really on the rise. And, we're not really sure why. But I think the important thing to remember is that allergies and intolerances and sensitivities, they're all symptoms of something deeper that's going on. And so it's really important. And that's what we do as naturopaths. We're digging deeper, and it all really comes down to the gut and the immune system. So, signs and symptoms for allergies and intolerances and sensitivities, obviously any sort of tummy upsets, any irregular bowels, but skin rashes and inflammation of the skin can be another really common sort of symptom. And I know, eczema is huge here in Australia, as I'm sure it is over in the States as well. Eczema is essentially an allergy kind of gut condition. And behavioral changes as well. So changes in mood and behavior can be a sign that, that some allergies or intolerances or sensitivities are developing. But really, it comes back to the gut and what we know, this is really an emerging area. It's such a fascinating area, the gut. But what we do know is microbiome diversity in the gut. So the range of different bacteria that we've got in there is one of the most protective things that we can do to prevent our kids or protect our kids from allergies and intolerances and sensitivity. So it all sort of comes back to building up that gut health, those fermented foods, the probiotic supplements when needed. So that's sort of the answer to that first part of the question. And the second part of the question, it can be really tricky, can't it? You know, for school and for church or those social occasions when you need to take a plate of something or where there's sharing, to be considerate to those kids with allergies. I guess here in Australia, we've got quite strict rules in terms of pretty much all schools are nut free. I don't know whether it's like that in the States.
It's getting closer, but
Yeah.
they're not. I mean, they're really not yet.
Yeah, right. So a lot of our schools here, you know, you just can't take nuts because it's just there's just too much of a risk, which for us that are focusing on getting more nutrients into our kids is tough because nuts are great.
So good and portable. I know, it's killer.
Yeah. So I guess it's just finding out, you know, who's allergic to what in the social circles, and generally just trying to make food for those share occasions that are that are low allergenic. So, you know, definitely no nuts. But I mean, the list of those allergenic foods is just growing. You know, we've now got eggs and gluten and dairy, and it's really hard to avoid all of those things, altogether. So it's a tricky area.
Yeah. Definitely. It definitely is. Sometimes it's like, well, maybe we'll just bring fruit.
Yes. Yeah, a fruit or a veggie platter. I think that's going to be safe most of the time. And, you know, at those social occasions, it's generally what's needed because there's usually a lot of rubbish.
Exactly. So true. Now, what about moms? Because I feel like we just give all day long and we deplete our energy, and sometimes we deplete our nutrient stores. So I was noticing on your site that you kind of work with both moms and kids, and I'm just wondering if you've seen issues that either maybe run in families or are like related, like mom's low in something in pregnancy and therefore the kids have such and such, if there's like pairs of issues that we might see in moms and kids.
Yeah, such an interesting area. There was some research done a few years ago that showed that what our grandmothers ate in their childhood is having an effect on what our health is doing now. And so that just kind of blows your mind. And in a way you think, oh, well, it can be a little bit unempowering because you think, well, you know, I can't change what my grandma ate, but what we can change is what we're eating for, you know, the next generations to come. So there's a really fascinating area in science called epigenetics. So we know that you know of epigenetics? Yeah.
Just a little, just enough to know that it's like mind-blowing and really cool.
Yeah, well, we all know that we're born with certain genes and we can't change those genes, but we can change the way that those genes are expressed. And it's our diet and lifestyle that can do that. So if we get really good nutrition, our genes can be sort of switched on or off. So they can be really protective of our health. So it's a huge area. And this is kind of the explanation that's given for what our grandmas ate, you know, switched on and off their genes, which led to, you know, the health of future generations. So I think it's empowering to know that we can switch on and off those genes. You know, there's so many more genetic tests out there where we can sort of look at our genetic potential and things that we might need to be careful of, and weaknesses in, you know, methylation or liver detoxification, those sorts of things. You can get really sort of deep into this, but generally, you know, what we do know is that if we've got a healthy diet and loaded with nutrients and a clean lifestyle, low in the toxins and the chemicals, then that's going to benefit the future generations.
So just to clarify, because again, it is kind of mind-blowing, if I do something to switch a certain gene on, hopefully it's a good gene, and then I get pregnant and have a baby, is that gene passed to them with a different expression than it would have been prior to whatever behavior switched that on?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so, but then their diet and lifestyle can then sort of switch that gene on and off. So we've all got that potential to be able to do that. But yeah, you're right. If you're in a better place health-wise and you've been nourishing your body, then you're going to be passing that down to your children, which is a little scary, but I guess we've got to look at it as, as empowering. I think we've got to put a positive spin on that.
Right, because we could easily, like, I'm even in my brain, like every time I hear about that, I'm like, I don't know if I was in a good place, and I've already had 4 children and I can't change that, like we can just go into like the pit of mom guilt despair. So don't go there. That's that would probably switch some bad gene on or something. Like
Yeah, exactly.
That's a bad lifestyle choice to focus on the changes we can make. Absolutely.
That's right. And so, I was just going to say, so we can then nourish our the kids really well, so that gene can be potentially switched off. Because I'm the same, when I had my son, he's 11 now, I wasn't as healthy as I am now. I think becoming a mum is the biggest sort of instigator for, becoming healthy. And so, don't look back at that, but think about that potential that you do have with your kids now.
Right. And the potential is like your grandkids and your great grandkids. Every good choice you make is going to impact more than just your kids. And so that's really powerful for sure.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we've got to talk about kids and cooking while we're on the subject. What do you see as the greatest benefit to getting kids like actually involved with food and in the kitchen?
Oh my gosh, so many. I guess number one is that connection, bringing back that connection that they can have with the food, where the food comes from. So often kids these days, they're just being served a plate of food. They have no idea where it's come from or how it's been made. So that's number one. And I know, you're all about this, but when we did our big trip around Australia, we were homeschooling, and one of the best things that I found that I could teach all the kids the maths and the science and the English and the reading was getting them involved in the cooking, reading a recipe and measuring it out and seeing what happens when we mix this with that. So I think there's so many of those, I guess academic-y sort of lessons, and, independence as well. I'm really big on my kids being able to cook. Like my son is 11, my daughter's 9. They can easily kind of whip something up. We have fend for yourself nights when I just can't be bothered cooking, usually on a Friday night. I call them. And it'll often be something quite simple. They'll just scramble some eggs for themselves or something like that. Or chop up some veggies. My daughter's big on raw veggie sticks. She loves them. Not so much the cooked veggies, but so they now can create a relatively healthy meal for themselves. So I think it's so super important to get our kids involved in the kitchen, and more so if they tend to have those picky or fussy eating habits, that exposure, even if they're not eating the food at the end of it, just having that exposure of touching the food and smelling the food and becoming more comfortable, more familiar with that food in the long run will definitely help to develop more healthy eating habits.
Yes, most absolutely. And I love that you said connection with the food, because I do hear like really jolting stories about kids who don't recognize a carrot unless it's a baby carrot. They don't have any idea like what animal certain meats come from. And I'm a little proud of this. Something just happened this morning. I went into my daughter's 5th grade classroom to help dissect pig lungs and heart. And so, I'm not that proud of. That was fun actually. But my 4-year-old, like I told him, this is where I'm going and this is what we're doing. And he goes, so is that like just meat? Like bacon? I was so glad. Like he knows bacon comes from a pig, that just pig parts are meat. And I'm like, that actually encapsulates a lot about the way we're trying to raise our kids, being connected to their food. And it was also very funny because well, not like bacon, but yeah, it is kind of just like meat. So I was able to use that story to like put the kids in my group at ease, because everyone's a little bit high, like fear factor as coming into this project.
Yeah, and that's great, isn't it? I think Jamie Oliver did a segment once where he was interviewing kids and asking them what was what, and it was crazy how little the kids knew about what the veggies were or where the food came from.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking of too. I saw that probably 10 years ago, and it's still etched in my mind, like Jamie standing in front of the classroom, like holding up a potato. They didn't know what it was. Oh my goodness.
I know, because they're used to just having the chips on the plate. And I think connection with our kids is important as well. Like as your kids get older, it's harder to find things that you can do together that you're both, different ways to connect. And I find with my eldest, one of the ways that we can sort of spend time together that we both enjoy is cooking, and it's a nice way to connect with the kids too.
That's awesome. So now we've gone a little bit down the fear path and the pit of despair. Let's come, back to solid ground here, because I always want to leave parents with something positive and really practical that they can accomplish right away, like a quick win. So what would be your one hot tip quick win for parents when it comes to balancing their kids' nutrition?
Yeah, I think it would be, going back to gut health. As a naturopath, I see, all the time, whether I'm treating a child with allergy, eczema, asthma, autism, or tummy aches, it's always going back to that gut health. It's so super important for all the rest of the body and for the absorption of our nutrients. We can be giving kids the healthiest food in the world, but if they're not absorbing it effectively, then, it's a bit of a waste. So looking after your kids' gut health needs to be a continual work in progress, because there's so many different factors within our diet and lifestyle that are depleting gut health. Sugar, antibacterial cleaning products, antibiotics, all these things deplete the good bacteria. So we need to be continually working to build that up. And I do have a little reference for your listeners and readers. It's a free little ebook that I have all about kids' gut health. And I use the analogy of our kids, like tending to our kids' gut health like it's a garden. So we need to feed and seed and reduce these sterilizers that are negatively affecting our kids' gut health. So if people want to know a bit more about, how exactly we can do that in really quite easy, practical terms, then they can definitely download a copy of the book. But fiber is one of the most important things. It's kind of an old school, health tip to make sure that we're eating plenty of fiber, but fiber feeds the good bugs within our digestive system. And we don't need to go for those, high fiber cereals that, all the food marketers make us believe that's what we need to do for fiber, but just a good range of veggies and whole grains and fruits, which we sort of talked about earlier, are the best way to get that beneficial fiber for our gut in.
Excellent. That is a great last tip, and I'm so glad you brought up your gift to the audience. I was thinking about that when we were talking about gut, and I was going to say it, and then my brain went somewhere else. My brain probably went into my kitchen, because I'm like a few days overdue on making new kombucha, and we've totally fallen out of the habit of giving our kids probiotics in the morning. So I'm like, you're talking and I'm like making a list in my head, like kombucha, probiotics, put them out on the counter. Like, it's just like moms, right? We have so
typical
much in our
moms.
brains.
I know. It'd be crazy to live in there, wouldn't it? In our brains and all that stuff going on.
Yeah, it's not. It's a scary place. So you've given us one great tip. Think about the gut. Think about that probiotics and that fiber, and we can do that. We can do that. That's very actionable. So thank you so much for being here, Jess.
You're welcome. So nice to talk to you. Thank you, Katie.
You too, and good morning and good night.
Yeah.
From both of us.
I've got the rest of my day to get on with. And you're going to bed.
Yeah, I got a little bit of work to do, but the kids are tucked.
Nice. That's lovely. See you later.
Awesome. Yes, and audience, we will see you back next week for more tips on how to raise healthy kids from the experts who have the information you need here at the Healthy Parenting Connector.